Matt Alt here, and 7-Eleven is in trouble. We have to help them. 7-Eleven is in trouble because a French-Canadian company called Couche-Tard is trying to acquire them. If this happens, it would be the biggest purchase of a Japanese company by a foreign company in Japanese history, and everybody's worried it's going to compromise the amazing Japanese convenience store quality of this leading chain that everybody has come to expect. So let's talk a little bit about the convenience store. Americans invented the convenience store, but Japanese arguably perfected it. And the pinnacle of that perfection can be seen in 7-Eleven, which is the biggest chain of convenience stores in Japan. 7-Eleven was founded in America in 1927. It came to Japan 50 years ago this year in 1974. But the parent company ran into trouble in America, financial trouble. And so in 1993, the Japanese side bought it out. And that made 7-Eleven a wholly Japanese-owned company. Now, you might be kind of surprised to hear this. If you ask most Americans, I think they would say that they thought it was American. It didn't make many headlines when the Japanese side bought out the American side and 7-Eleven became Japanese in 1993, because I think it was after the Japanese bubble economy had burst and Japan was no longer in the headlines as the financial tiger that it had been in the 80s, when you saw all of this Japan bashing and, you know, all sorts of insane rhetoric in the media every time a Japanese company would buy like the Rockefeller Center or the Pebble Beach golf course or what have you. So the idea that Couche-Tard, this foreign company, would come in here and purchase 7-Eleven has led to a lot of consternation among both the 7-Eleven executives and people on the ground. First, the executives. You might ask yourself, well, if they don't want to sell, why would they? The answer is simple, and that's because corporate governance laws have changed in Japan in recent years, and now companies are obligated to consider any offer that would benefit their shareholders substantially. And on paper, at least, this looks like a very good deal for 7-Eleven shareholders. So because of that, the company is compelled to consider it seriously. However, there's a lot of reluctance inside 7&I Holdings, which is the name of the company that runs 7-Eleven. And they, last week, appealed to the Japanese government to be considered what is called a core business to Japanese security and defense. Now, this seems a little bit funny. Like, why would a convenience store be considered key to defense, national security? And it's not quite as crazy as it sounds, because convenience stores play a really important role in times of disaster. And there's a lot of natural disasters in Japan, especially earthquakes. When that happens, convenience stores can play the role of like a meeting place for people. They have food, of course, they have supplies, places where you might be able to, like, I don't know, recharge your phone. So it's not out of the question that you would consider a place like 7-Eleven essential in that sort of situation. But alas, the Japanese government said, no, sorry, you know, you might be a really cool company, you might have really good soft drinks, beverages, and onigiri, but you are not essential to Japanese defense and security. So now the deal is being considered again. There's a lot of reporting in the Japanese press about this, and the newspapers have done a lot of, you know, man on the ground, woman on the ground, kind of canvassing people what they think. And a couple of days ago, and I believe it was the Yomiuri Shimbun, there was a really interesting article that had a quote from a person who said, I don't have any problem with foreign companies coming here and buying up Japanese ones. I just don't want them buying this one. And it's easy to understand why. Like I said before, Americans invented the convenience store, but Japanese perfected them. The 7-Elevens in Japan are not very much like the ones that I grew up on as a kid in Maryland. Those were kind of dark and dingy. They were filled with all sorts of really highly processed snacks like Slurpees and Slim Jims and what about the candies? Remember, like Fun Dip? Do you remember that stuff? It's like cocaine for kids. It's like sugar powder that you would like lick up, like all sorts of like goodies like that. And you know, God bless them. Like, I love that kind of junk food too. Meanwhile, in Japan, 7-Eleven has turned convenience store cuisine into like high art. You can get really good food there. You can get things like onigiri rice balls, and you can get like fresh salads. And then there's all their sandwiches, like those little triangular egg salad sandwiches that Anthony Bourdain said were some of his favorite. I like them too. You can actually eat pretty well at a 7-Eleven in Japan. They're bright, they're clean, they're places that you actually want to spend time in, which really sets them apart from Western convenience stores. Actually, just a couple weeks ago when I was in New York City for Anime NYC, I went to a 7-Eleven because I needed some water, and I was shocked at how different it was from the Japanese one. But it's interesting because now Japan is in. Japan is cool, right? And so the 7-Eleven Japan parent company has actually started exporting its typical sorts of foods. It's those triangular sandwiches, the onigiri, to Western 7-Elevens. And customers have really been reacting to this. They think it's really cool. And it is really cool to see these Japanese foods available in the United States. They're not available everywhere. They're only available at select 7-Elevens in the States. But this whole experiment in Japanizing the American 7-Eleven side of things could come to a crashing halt if Couche-Tard succeeds at purchasing the company and jettisons the Japanese way of doing business. However, there's another really interesting twist at work here, and that is one of the biggest obstacles to this Canadian company buying this Japanese company 7-Eleven is the Americans. Now, the question is why? Why would the Americans care about a Canadian company buying a Japanese company? The answer to this is really interesting. 7-Eleven has a very substantial presence in the United States, as anybody who's gone there knows. And so if Couche-Tard, who runs all of the Circle K convenience stores, buys 7-Eleven, it could be seen as a monopoly in the American marketplace. And this is right now not a very good time for companies who are trying to become monopolies in the United States. It would almost certainly be struck down by American regulators. So this is a really interesting moment. It used to be back in the 80s that when Japanese companies would buy American ones, it would outrage Americans. Now we have a situation where 7-Eleven, who purchased an American company and became Japanese, is looked at to be purchased by a Canadian company, and the Americans might oppose it for regulatory reasons, not moral ones. It's globalization in a nutshell. And it's a very interesting story. It's playing out right now, and it's very visceral for everybody who spends a lot of time in Japan and at convenience stores, like basically everyone here does, because in urban centers, they really are everywhere. If you've ever spent any time here, you'd know that. So that's it for this time. I'm gonna be, I don't know who we is, it's just me. I'm gonna be continuing to watch this story because it's a really interesting mix of geopolitics, finance, and like on-the-ground pop culture in the form of 7-Eleven, convenience stores, and Conbini culture, as the Japanese call it. So I'm gonna keep watching this. It'll be really interesting to see how it turns out. I personally am on the side of 7 & I Holdings here. I want 7-Eleven to remain as Japanese as possible. I love the level of quality and the level of products they deliver. So we're just gonna have to wait and see. Thanks for watching. I'm going to link to an article that I wrote about Japanese Conbini culture on my newsletter in the comments or in the description below. And if you like this, please hit that subscribe button. I really appreciate it. Catch you next time.